In today's artist tip portion of this live stream, I'm going to be teaching you how to fire your manager. Now, the beautiful thing about for those of you who are watching right now or watching a little bit later is that this is specific to, personal managers, business managers, any kind of managers, but it really does extend to anyone that you are in a business relationship with that you need to fire. Okay. So, being a real entertainment attorney, this is literally the conversation that I have with clients. And this is a very, very common question that I get, especially with these kind of hot topics that we get hired for. I want to obviously provide an avenue so that you guys can understand the process, understand how to kind of protect yourselves and how to get out of it and what steps to take. So the first piece of this, and we're always going to have this conversation of, is there a contract with the manager? I find usually there is a contract. Managers have a tendency to want to protect themselves, which is, fair. We want to have something in writing. So, as far as, is there an agreement? And then, if not, that's where we start. Okay. So if there's no contract, then I'll say, well, what was kind of the understanding as far as how long is the manager going to represent you for? Let's just start there. And the artist might say, well, the agreement had been, the manager was going to represent me for a year. It's been longer than a year. We're like in year 2. So honestly, I don't really know where things are. That's fair. So then the next question is, we're going to talk about termination, right? And how to actually sever that relationship. And we're going to talk about it as it relates to providing formal notice, which is the last piece of this process. But if there's no contract, then arguably we look at what was the verbal agreement between the parties. And then if we're kind of in, almost like when your lease expires and you end up going month to month, right? Because now you don't have a set term. That's kind of how it works with the relationship, right? It's just kind of ongoing until someone decides to terminate, at which point you're going to provide formal notice, and I'll walk you through that. All right. So that's situation number 1. Situation number 2 is when you do have a management agreement. Okay. So you actually do have something in writing with that person. And, I'll talk about kind of the main issues that I see come up. And I think this would be helpful for those of you watching because this is very common and this might be your situation. All right. So the first kind of common issue that we run into has to do with the length of the agreement. And so, a common management agreement is between maybe 1 and 3 years. I have seen management agreements that were for like 5+ years, which is to me a little bit ridiculous, way overbroad. And, if I'm representing the artist on these management agreements, I'll say no more than 1 year. Anything more than a year is something that's going to make me nervous, because what if it doesn't work out with this manager, right? What if just personalities don't vibe? Or even worse than that, the manager ends up being really bad at his or her job, right? And they lose you deals, or, they lose you relationships. Because here's the thing, guys, when it comes to management is supposed to be the liaison, right? The person between you and some kind of gig or opportunity or collaboration or sponsorship. They're the ones kind of handling negotiations on your behalf. So, so going back to kind of the first thing of when we're looking at the term, right? When does the contract naturally expire? So if the contract, for example, we're in month 8 and the contract is only for 1 year, obviously I'll have the conversation with the artist and say, obviously, one of the options that you have at this point is just to wait till natural expiration. And then once we get to natural expiration, we will send notice of termination. Again, that last piece we'll be talking about in the segment. So then moving on, we look at what are the services that the manager promised to provide. So and you know what? Actually, sorry, I got a little off in my notes. I just want to say really fast. Thank you very much. Here, where's my Ripley? There we go. Thank you very much for the super chat. As always, guys, anything that is donated, it's very, very generous. I appreciate it so much. And we'll be buying Ripley some treats. I recorded a cute video of her today, which I'll also be sharing with you guys. Okay. So as it relates to what did the manager promise to do? Now, oftentimes the management agreement will just say things like, manager agrees to provide great mentorship, right? To review and approve, artists' publicity, to sign deals, to review contracts, right? So it's a pretty long list of all the things that the manager is entitled to do, which is listed under the management services. Okay. but it doesn't usually actually say that the manager is going to do X, Y, and Z. I will get you these number of collaborations, sponsorships, income. It's never going to say something like that. It's very, very loosey-goosey with the language, which it kind of needs to be, because obviously a manager can't guarantee what's going to happen. They don't know. But that's where part of the problem comes into play. Because when I have someone contacting me for help about a management issue, we're usually looking at how do we terminate the agreement, get out of it, fire the manager, and be done with it. So if my question is going to be, well, has the manager complied? Did the manager provide these services? Now, in some extreme situations, let me tell you, I've had, situations where the manager goes MIA for 6 months. In my mind, and my legal argument to that is that there's been a breach of contract because the manager didn't do shit for 6 months. If the manager is intended to be like a personal manager, a day-to-day manager, that means there needs to be regular ongoing communication. So if there has been a very large gap in communication and the representation, that may be a basis to terminate. That's a good thing, okay? And then we're also going to look in the contract as it relates to expenses and loans. All right, so I had one situation where, the artist was a little nervous because the artist wanted to fire the manager, just very concerned about the manager not doing what had been discussed. But the manager had paid for a lot of stuff for this artist. Now, there might be different, scenarios where maybe the manager gets into it because the manager has a crush on the artist, right? So it's kind of paying for this and paying for that. And the artist is just like, oh, cool. Thank you so much. That's great. I appreciate your support. Or even just someone who just cares, right? Maybe the manager's your mom. So even though there's that familial relationship, nonetheless, it's still a business relationship. So in any case, the artist's question was, so if I terminate the relationship, is the manager going to now be able to sue me and say, hey, I want to get reimbursed for all of those expenses? So we have a conversation about that, because likely, at least in that scenario, the answer is no, right? So if someone has kind of gifted you things without an expectation or an agreement that they're going to get paid back, then they can't come back later and say, oh, it was actually a loan. But you got to be careful, because they might come back later and say, no, it was a loan and you agreed you're going to reimburse those amounts. So that's another part of the disputes that I often do see come up. And then conflicts of interest. Let's talk about this for a sec. Okay. The manager, and in all of these management agreements, does not work for you exclusively. Now, while, obviously you can be like, oh, that makes sense. That's intuitive, right? There's managers who manage a bunch of artists. When this comes up is when, again, that manager is kind of going MIA, or that manager isn't really doing anything. That is a huge basis of why people call my office and they go, I'm giving this manager XYZ percentage of my income, and this manager isn't doing shit. This manager is not getting me my bookings. I'm getting my bookings. I'm having the calls, and I'm setting this up and that up and getting my sponsorship deals. And that was actually the basis of why I fired my last manager, which I'll talk to you guys about in just a minute. But, it's a common complaint, right? Especially for independent artists who are hustling, who are doing a lot of work. And then the manager's just kind of sitting back and collecting revenues. Okay. So keep in mind that the manager is not required to work exclusively for you. However, it might be a basis to allege a material breach if the manager is, again, either going MIA or is kind of overly distracted with other projects. And we call that, there's like a material interference with the manager being the day-to-day manager. I had this happen. I've been doing this a while, guys. I've had a lot of situations, but I had this happen where the manager was representing a house of creators, right? So I'm sure you guys have heard these. And in this case, it was a bunch of kids kind of living together, making content, and the manager represented a lot of, the kids in the house. And my client basically was just kind of getting shelved, right? And the manager was focusing on the more successful creators. So again, that goes back to, is the manager kind of going MIA, not doing the day-to-day management, in which case that might be a material breach. All right. And then beware of the sunset clause. Ouch, when this is missed. Okay. So, if you bring the contract to my office, I'm reviewing it, and there's language that says after we terminate the contract, the manager gets to continue receiving revenues for a period of time. I've seen it where the manager's like, hey, I represented you for 6 months. I'm going to collect 20% for the next 6 years. Okay. We're going to go and have a little fight about that being completely unreasonable, of course. But if the artist agreed to it and signed it in the contract, then that's not good. And so that's a bad fact for us. So before you sign the contract, obviously, that's why I'm kind of pointing out some of these things so you guys can keep this in mind. Even if you have a situation right now, you're probably going to work with another manager. And when you work with that manager, now you got some pro tips and you'll be able to think more like an attorney. All right, let's go back to the comments really fast. There we go. Love it. All right, we have new friends filing in. Thank you for being here. CJ says, no matter the personal relationship, you got to understand that business relationships are completely separate and different. Yeah, that's a great point. To the extent that you have mom representing you as a manager, at some point that has to be very clearly designated as a business relationship, because people get so comfortable when it's your mom, when it's a sister, another family member. We get very, very comfortable. And so lines are crossed, right? And that can create problems. And people get lazy. All right. So David on YouTube, why you fired your manager? Ooh, we're going to get into that. All right. We're going to get to that. So then going back to now the last piece of this. So we got to fire them one way or another. That was the point of this video. We have to send written notice. Always send written notice, guys. Meaning if you're going to fire them, make sure you put together like a letter would be the best, case possible. An email sometimes will suffice, but look at the contract. If you do have a contract, it usually says in the contract, you have to provide notice this way, which is usually via physical mail. They might require a copy be sent via email. There might be certain postage requirements. I mean, just make sure you actually read the contract, because you don't want to give the manager, an argument that you didn't comply. And so therefore termination is not effective, right? And then 6 months later, the manager's like, hey, by the way, your termination was not effective and you owe me what obviously my percentage was for that time. Because in a lot of contracts, they automatically renew if you don't terminate them. So another pro tip, calendar the termination date. So if it's like 1 year, from today's date, put it on your calendar with reminders with like 3 months ahead of time. Hey, reminder, it's coming up. Hey, reminder, it's coming up, because you will forget. So when it comes to a termination notice, the absolute best way is have a letter and have an attorney sign it and do it for you, right? Write it, sign it, send it on your behalf. And it sometimes can help to avoid some issues, because now they know you're actually represented by a real attorney, right? Because, a lot of managers might want to push back. If they see you as profitable, be like, no, you can't terminate for this reason. And if you have a real attorney who understands what the contract says, how it works, then, they're not going to be so startled by, baseless arguments, which is often what happens. All right. So when it comes to kind of my personal story with this, I, have signed with a number of managers and management companies, throughout my career. And it's funny, even as I'm about to tell a story, I'm kind of thinking about Selena, right? So, if you guys know, Selena's kind of history, right? Her dad was representing her for a long time, and she even fired him, right? So back to the whole when family is working with you. But in any case, so, there were a number of managers that I've worked with and management companies. And, I have kind of a common complaint that I find with kind of independent artists who are really hustling. And it's that I'm doing way more than the manager is. Okay. And on the very last management team, I'll call it a team because it wasn't just one person, right? So they sold me on, they had like 10 people assigned to my project from this one company, right? So, and I got to actually see it in real time before we signed, which is something I advise to my clients for sure. And I go, before you sign a contract, get to know the person and kind of have a courtship, right? Before you get married, date the person for a little bit. So have that courtship and see them and see how projects go together. And so in any case, I kind of saw them in action and they were just busting their ass and by all accounts, I was super excited. I was like, holy shit, to have a multi-person team working on my behalf every day. That's like a dream come true. So I definitely did sign with this company. And a few months into it, I saw that there was just a lot of busy work, which is what I'd kind of seen in the beginning, right? So they're sending out emails, they're putting together press packages and doing all this busy work, but they didn't actually know what they were doing, right? So that was where the issue started to happen. And so then as they were not getting results over so many months, they were pulling back. But, as I was kind of talking to them, I'm like, you guys are doing this wrong. Like, not that I'm the expert, right? At this point, I was still, pretty early in my career, but I go, this is probably what we should be doing instead. So, when it came time to kind of terminate, my basis for termination was just natural expiration of the agreement. So nonetheless, I took my own advice, right? This was prior to becoming an attorney, but I hired an attorney and I got an entertainment attorney. I paid her like $300 to draft a simple letter just to say, hey, nice working with you. We're going to terminate, adios. And it's funny because even that management company, they were kind of butthurt about it. Which, it is what it is. But you have to protect yourself. And a part of my peeve was that, at some point when they had pulled back and they had stopped really doing much of anything, they were still sitting back and collecting revenue that was coming in from my hard work. And so, I kind of found for my own project at this point that I loved the idea of having a team, right? And that's really important to me. But now I just pay people. And now there's a very clear line of communication on what we're doing and strategy and execution. And it's very ideal for me as an artist and something that I would definitely recommend to anyone else. I don't think just kind of, signing with someone and giving a portion of your revenue is always the best idea. And so sometimes just hiring contractors to kind of do stuff for you here and there and finding the best fit is really, it's like a magical thing. Okay, I have like a magical feeling about my my team, and I love them so much, but it takes time. It definitely takes time to find the right people. And yes, and then of course, you write your press kit, you get an EPK. And, by the way, actually, yeah, I don't have it with me. I had one of my books. Get a management agreement. If you don't have it, back to the first case scenario. If you don't have a management agreement, please get one. I have a free template in my book, How to Keep Your Dukes Up in the Music Business. Oh, here my music producer comes. There it is. All right, so this is the book. Most management agreements will cost you like $500 to get from a law firm. It comes for free as part of this book. There's 8 contracts. There's like collaboration agreements, featured artist agreements, all kinds of things. Please stay protected. Make sure you have a contract, because then guess what? If you have a contract and the contract says we get to fire you after a year, you get to fire the manager after a year. So make sure you stay legally protected.